Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So Aglaea was just drip marketed and she is the first ever remembrance character. And today in this video I will be explaining the prospects of what remembrance could bring, the problems that remembrance could have very early on, and why I believe that Aglaea could be a free standard 5-star. First of all, I just want to say this, I am very excited for a new path I mean, because of the amount of prospects it brings. Now, the first prospect of a new path is that the fact that there's a new path at all means that it's totally not impossible to bring new paths. Like for example, they could bring in elation next, they could bring propagation next, they could bring voracity next, they could bring terminus next. Anything is possible now, which means it just allows more variety and just allows more design spacing for future characters. And because of that, we get new playstyles. If the remembrance path is different enough from other characters, we could start playing characters in a different way from the conventional ones, which is pretty good. And it could incentivize characters that are pretty bad because they don't work well with a lot of characters, but with remembrance being there, they may be able to be useful, which is pretty good. And because of that, we may get new game modes that specifically cater to these playstyles and this new path. So, more ways to sell endgame, more ways to sell paths, always good for the game. And with that too, we could also have new simulated universe modes for DLC, meaning there's just a lot of content that a new path could bring, basically. Very exciting if you're an old player and you want to jump back in. Now, it's not entirely perfect though. There are some early growing pains of having a path, and the roots of it is that it's just underdeveloped if you're trying to create a new path. First of all, the earliest problem that would be pretty obvious is, where are the remembrance light cone? We don't have it in the game yet, and well, this is pretty easily fixable. I'm sure that in 3.0 or 2.8 they're just gonna throw a Herta shop light cone or a Forgotten Hall light cone that is free to play, accessible, and very nice for the player, so that could work too. But a pretty bad thing that could happen if you're developing a new path like this is there could be a meta homogeny. And what I mean by that is, because you just created the remembrance archetype or the remembrance path, then you're gonna wanna have to release a lot of remembrance consecutively just to fill it out. And it already happened in Genshin in 3.0, and it wasn't as bad there because some characters were just good anyway, and the power creep in that game isn't as severe. But in Honkai the balancing and the timing of characters is a lot more fragile, that it could be a pretty slippery slope. If you just don't like remembrance as a path, you may not be able to clear endgame at all, which could feel pretty bad. Or if you just don't like the characters for 1 month, then you're gonna end up with a roster that doesn't have the archetype to clear endgame. So the meta homogeny is gonna be a pretty bad thing if it ever comes to pass. I'm sure that the devs will try to solve this, but it would lead me to my next point, and that is why I think Aglaea could be a standard 5-star. First of all, we have to set some parameters for this of why Aglaea could be a free 5-star standard character. Now, first of this is that there has to be no free 4-star remembrance on launch, or the Trailblazer himself isn't remembrance. Because if we look at an archetype that has a similar weakness is DOT. The DOT is so inaccessible for free-to-play players, and testing it out with just the 4-star alternatives or the free alternative for DOT means you have an impression that the DOT archetype is so bad because the gap between 4-star and 5-star is so terrible. So what ends up happening is people testing out the free version and not being very impressed and not pulling the 5-star version. So in this case, if there is no good free remembrance option, then people aren't going to be hyped to have a premium remembrance option. And that will certainly hurt the players, and that could hurt the devs in the long run because people just don't want to pull all these remembrance characters. Even if they try to hike up the power creep too high, I don't think people will appreciate really the power creep just to get people to pull. So the solution to this is maybe Aglaea is just a standard character, because if we look at the standard banner, there's one of each path. So it would make sense if there was at least one standard 5-star character, and giving it at the start would make the most sense, would it not? And Herta isn't remembrance, so there's no like other 5-star remembrance that it could be. So maybe Aglaea is just a standard character. It would make a lot of sense, will solve the accessibility problem of remembrance. It's just an all-around win I could see. Even if Aglaea sales could haunt, I feel like it's a lot better to have that than to tank the goodwill of the players. But again, remember the parameters. No free remembrance option on launch. Now with that being said, Aglaea being possible as a 5-star standard character, could she be free? Well, some people will probably get screwed over that they already spent their 300 for a 5-star selector on the standard, and they want Aglaea, and they probably feel screwed over by that. So I think an appropriate solution for this could be a free 5-star standard selector. Does that sound crazy? Does that sound a little bit too generous? Maybe, but again, this is a new path entirely, and depending on how they balance this new path, it could mean that even if you do have Aglaea Aglaea for free, you may still want their limited support like maybe Sunday to have a really noticeable performance compared to other archetypes. Does that make sense? I think it makes sense. I think that Aglaea being a free standard 5-star actually makes sense in this context because it just solves a lot of problems for Remembrance in the short term. But maybe I'm not thinking of this very well, and again, the parameters, there has to be no free accessible Remembrance character from launch, because otherwise Aglaea may just stay being limited and people may just have to resort to using that free accessible version, and if the free accessible version is good enough, then yeah, people will still prefer Aglaea. So that's nice. So yeah, that's my speculation, and that is what I think about the Remembrance path and the implications of it, and Aglaea herself, if she's free or she's a 5-star or anything, or if she's a standard 5-star or anything. So yeah, like, comment, subscribe, do all the algorithm stuff. I'll see you in Friday. I'll be streaming the live stream. So yeah, see ya, bye.